All right. Welcome, everybody, to our near death and spiritually transformative experiences Ali group. My name is Catherine. I'm so happy that you're with us. And today we have a beautiful person that I met at the oh gosh, I'm sorry, IANS conference. A little brain freeze there last month. And it was so nice to meet Tricia. Her name is Tricia Barker. And I'm just going to read a little bit about Tricia. Tricia Barker experienced a profound near death experience during her senior year of college. And this experience guided her to teach overseas, in public schools, and at the college level. Her near death experience story has been featured on Survived Beyond and Back, Season 1, Life to Afterlife, Death and Back, National Geographic Magazine, Simple Grace Magazine, Women's World Magazine, Coast to Coast, AM, Gaia, and WFAA. Tricia's memoir, Angels in the OR: What Dying Taught Me About Healing, Surviving, and Transformation, is available as an ebook, paperback, and through Audible. Tricia is a graduate of the University of Texas. She received her MFA in creative writing from Goddard College, and she is a professor, author, medium, and theta healer. Tricia also interviews other near-death experiencers, researchers, healers, spiritual teachers, and mediums on her YouTube channel. Welcome, Tricia. So nice to have you here with us.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. So, so we would love to hear your story and anything else that you feel called to share about you and your journey.
Yeah, definitely. The near-death experience is such a profound change for so many people, and I'm sure this isn't your first one that you've heard. And has anyone heard my story before? No, yay. So I have a fresh audience. All right. Love it. Well, I was raised in an evangelical church, and my mother was profoundly abusive, and my uncle was also abusive. And so I kind of turned away from religion at a young age. I thought, who are these people to talk about God? And my only saving grace was education. I loved school, loved reading, and really considered myself an agnostic by the time I was in seventh grade. Definitely by the time I was a senior in college. My plan was to go to law school, and yet emotionally there was a lot of things that I hadn't dealt with. I was going to therapy about some of the childhood abuse, but my life just wasn't on track. And I remember thinking, okay, this race that I was going to run, this was a way, the Austin 10K, this was a way of really motivating myself to have a brighter future, to have a beautiful future in some ways. But at this time, I was terrified of death. The thought of dying to me was horrific. It was just this idea of nothingness and really kind of terrifying. And a few months before my NDE, I started having more and more fears about death. And there were these moments where I would just, I was driving my car and I would be at a stoplight and I would think about death and think, oh, that's so terrifying. What happens, when you are just no longer here? Do you just blend into the nothingness of everything? I had no spiritual practice. I tried one yoga class and one meditation class out in a Kundalini class out in the quad at UT. But ultimately, I kind of felt alone in the world and unsupported. And um, on the way to run this race, I had a head-on collision. So I did not stop for coffee. I'll never know if this was my fault or the other person's fault. I know I went through the first light and it was yellow. The next one, we collided, and he must have jumped the gun, even if I was going through a red light, because we hit each other at about 50 miles an hour. I was in a Honda Civic, and My back broke in three different places. I was immediately slumped over and I couldn't move. And I knew that this was pretty serious. That I'd never broken a bone. You know, I was an athlete in high school and I knew that something was wrong. You know, I could not reach my glove box to get my license and registration. And this was before the law that requires people to stop and help people in an accident. So three people passed us. The man got out of his car and he was bleeding because his windshield had cracked, and so there was blood running down his face, and he was holding his 3-year-old, and she also had blood running down her face. So it was pretty gruesome. One group of teenagers slammed on their brakes and looked at us and screamed and then drove on. And this is 1994, so there were no cell phones, so I don't know if they drove on and called someone. But this is a Sunday morning. I saw a couple of people, you know, dressed for church who just ignored us and kept driving. And I thought, who is going to stop? You know, like, we need help here. Well, a nurse stopped, and I remember her long hair, kind of like yours, Catherine. She had this beautiful long hair, and she was very comforting and very kind. And she jumped in the car with me, and she told her boyfriend to run across the street and call for an ambulance. She said, I know they look bad, but you're the one that's in really bad shape, and I'm going to stay with you and hold your hand and tell you not to move. Don't move, because they're going to put you on a board, and this is going to be a very long day. And I don't know if you have neck injuries or back injuries, but something is wrong, and they're going to fix this at the hospital. Well, I remember looking up and giving one of those foxhole prayers. I didn't really believe in any God or any type of higher power, but I just was like, oh God, if there is a God, help me get through this day and help me walk and help me live. This is major. So taken into the hospital. At this time, this was a Sunday. It was a long day. They knew I had internal injuries. They kept me strapped to a board. They did all the MRIs, every type of test, and they told me that my back was broken and that I was going to need emergency spinal surgery. Well, when I was in one waiting room, I overheard a nurse get off the phone, and she was somewhere behind me, and she was talking to a fellow nurse, and she said, he's not coming in. She doesn't have health insurance. Isn't that typical? And so I realized that someone was refusing my case because I didn't have health insurance. At that time, I lost it. I was screaming, crying. They moved me out into the hall. The mother of the man who I had been in the accident with, she was very lovely. She prayed with me, and she said, my son and granddaughter are going to be fine. They did plastic surgery on their head, but I'm really worried about you. And I just want to say a prayer with you. And she was just this lovely woman. And I remember calming down. And then my grandmother showed up, and other people, had driven across the country and state to get to the hospital. I waited several more hours, and then to, like my great luck or divinity, the head of surgery happened to walk by me, named Laura Flan, and she looked at my chart. She had been on duty for 40 hours. And so she said, I can't operate on you right now. I'm very tired, but I'm going to go home. I'm going to rest for a while. I'm going to eat dinner, and then I'm going to take your case. And I said, thank you, because if I can't walk, I will kill myself. And, that was my moment of addressing her. She went home, took me into surgery. The next thing I knew, after they put, I'm sure some of you may have had surgeries, but, after they put the anesthesia on you, the next thing I knew, it must have been midway through the spinal surgery, but I lifted up out of my body, and I was in the corner of the room looking down at my body. And the first thing I thought is, oh my God, we go on. How exciting. Like I knew immediately that this was not a dream, that this was definitely an experience. And I felt alive, even though I was, quote, dead, looking at my body. So as I looked at my body, I thought, wow, surgery is pretty brutal. It's kind of bloody. I didn't expect this much blood to be on the table. And then the next thing I realized was there were these amazing angels standing behind my surgeon. And these angels were about 8 or 9 feet tall, and I call them angels. I didn't really have words for them. They were light beings, they were intelligent, they were more intelligent beings than I had ever seen, and they spoke with telepathy through their eyes. And I remember thinking, oh, there's so much more to this reality. There's angels. There's these forces that we're not even aware of as we're going through our days. Like this is more like theater because we're not seeing behind the veil. And that was one of my thoughts. And as the angels like looked at me, they sent this light into my spirit body through the back of the surgeons into their hands, and my whole body lit up with this light. And the light was intelligence and healing. I knew that I'd walk, I knew that I'd run, I knew that I would be healed, basically. And I knew that they were assisting the neurosurgeons. So I couldn't help but wonder, do the neurosurgeons know that they're supported by this light? Do they know that they are cared for by these intelligent beings? Are they working with them? You know, these were some of my thoughts. But then we all know that sound from television, the monitor flatlined. And so at that moment, I was like, oh, I'm dead. You know, like that was an out of body experience. This is the death experience. And the light beings, the angels, told me I could go explore the hospital, the cosmos, the afterlife, that I was free to go for a while. And so just, you know, just like thinking about a ghost, I hesitated for a moment at the door of the operating theater, as they call it in England, you know, the operating room, as we call it here. And I thought, oh, you just go through it. So I went through it. I went through a couple more walls, and I saw my stepdad getting a candy bar. Now, researchers love this part of my story, and that's why I've been featured in so much media, because it's a verifiable moment outside of body. So later I saw you know, I was able to verify that he did indeed get this candy bar. Well, it wasn't important to me though. What was important to me was just seeing him and going, oh, I hope he's good to my mom. I hope they have a good life. I wasn't really thinking that much about anything other than I was feeling freer and freer by the moment. No fear, no pain. And as I left the hospital, I just kind of merged with the night sky, and I felt this oneness with everyone I'd ever known. And all that we take with us, as they say, is love. And that was one of the first messages. I just sent love to everyone, like, have a good life. You know, I'm not there to participate in it, but you have fun with it. You know, you have a great life. You know, I'm somewhere else. Eat me. You know, the soul of me has gone on. And that freedom and that love is something we don't touch in this life very often. But I kind of had this beginning of oneness, maybe not with everyone on the earth, but certainly with everyone I'd ever known and heard about, anyone I'd read about. You know, there was this sense of I'm one with all. And as I merged into what I now see is something that looks like what Catherine has behind her, like this cosmos of stars. I've seen images from the James Webb Telescope that look very similar to what I experienced out there. I was floating in space. Again, no fear, just absolute joy. And I felt the beginning of this higher intelligence, which you might call God. I just call it light and intelligence at this point. And I was hearing certain messages that love is all we take with us when we go, remind them to go to nature, be like a little child, enjoy the simple, beautiful moments of life. And I remember thinking, these are basic messages, okay? You know, like I need a little more, you know, like this, I get it, but you know, I need more. And then I transitioned into what I call a holding place, but some people might call it heaven. The only person I knew who was dead was my grandfather, and he was a very loving, wonderful guy who had died of leukemia when I was 10. Well, there he was like 35, very handsome. You know, I hardly recognized him at first. He had a very square jaw, kind of like, you know, different from how he looked in his older age, and his eyes shone with light, much like those angels. And in that space, we just kind of hung out and communed with one another. Well, at some point, maybe my surgery wasn't going well. There was a chance I might die. He looked at me and he said, "Do you want to keep going?" And I knew he meant kept going towards God. And I was like, "Yeah." Like who wouldn't want to meet God? Like, of course, I'm going to go to God. And as I was going towards that light of God, I felt people's prayers almost like an energy, and they were trying to pull me back. And people often ask me, what is the essence of a good prayer? It's just love. If you love someone, they feel it. If you are connected to someone, they feel it. If you are praying for someone as they die, they know that you love them. They know that you're connected to them. There is no break in that connection between love. So I heard every word that people said. I heard it all, but in that moment, I kind of didn't care. I was like, there's God up ahead. I want to know God. And as I was going towards this light of God, all of the pain of this life, the bullying, the physical, emotional abuse, all of the abuses in life that I had experienced were taken away from me. It was as if this force was saying, "That's them, not you. Let it go. You are loved." And I had never felt okay. I think most of us feel uh, pain in our bodies, uncomfortableness, this need to do something. I think all of life is generally a little bit uncomfortable. In that presence of God, for the first time, I felt fine, more than fine. I felt loved, safe, happy, joyful. I was like, who wants to be back there? This is great. Like, this is the first time I've ever felt good. This is better than, any time I've been in love. This is better than the best vacation I've ever had. This is better than, anything. This is better than the best meal I've ever had. I just remember thinking, ugh, that place, Earth, has nothing compared to this. And in that moment, I decided I'm not coming back. So the minute I said that, in my consciousness, there was this energy wall that was just like, when it was like I literally hit a wall. And then I heard this booming voice, and, people often refer to God as He. And I see why, because there's a loud, booming quality to the voice that you can't deny, but it was a vibration. It wasn't a male or female voice. It was just like a powerful, undeniable voice. And, all the people who attack near-death experiencers and say, you were just, uh, you know, you were just fooled by some demonic light. I'm like, your soul cannot, it absolutely cannot mistake God. When you are in the presence of God, it is unmistakable, and that love is eternal, powerful. You understand yourself as created. That is the center of creation. You understand yourself as part of that love, part of that creation. I knew that I was energetically changing from the young woman that I was, who was very insecure, who wanted to make a lot of money. And I just knew in that moment I'm different. I'm truly different in the presence of God. Well, God said, look down. And I looked down into, it was, metaphors, but the clouds parted and I saw this river, and I saw various people with light around them or darkness around them. And the light represented love and a connection to God, and the darkness represented fear. It didn't necessarily mean bad or evil. It just meant fear. And that's what I understood. That yes, people may do things out of fear that are painful and horrible to others, but really the root of it is either being disconnected or being connected to God. So you're either connected or not. And God was like, you're going to go back and you're going to be a teacher. And you're going to work in school systems, and you're going to remind everyone to turn on their lights, to be in the joy of who they are. And I understood this not as religious, but as if you have a mission, if you have a connection to your soul's purpose, even if you're an atheist, even if you're a brilliant neurosurgeon and you have absolutely no belief in God, but you have a desire, as my neurosurgeon did, to help people walk, to help athletes in college after major injuries, then you're supported by love because you're doing good in this world. You are using your divine gifts in a way that helps others. And I saw, okay, so I'm meant to empower people to be their best selves, maybe through education. But then I stopped and I thought about it and I was like, oh, no, 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 God. I grew up poor. In this society, you need money to protect yourself. I was like, I am not going back to that earth without money. I was like, nope, 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 nope. I planned on being a lawyer and that's what I'm going to do. And then God laughed at me. And it was like my soul was crunched up into a softball and thrown back into my body. And I remember like the darkness of this world, like in the density of it coming back to this painful body that had just come out of surgery. And my brain was cloudy from the anesthesia, from the morphine they were beginning to pump into me. But I woke up with an understanding immediately that I had had a near-death experience. I had taken a course called Varieties of Religion in college, and I'd actually read about near-death experiences. I knew immediately what had happened to me. I wasn't under any guise of being talked out of this. I understood that I was changed, and I understood energetically because before my near-death experience, I was so encased in this body. There was nothing, I didn't get outside of my body. The minute I woke up from surgery, it was like my energy filled up the whole room, that I could read people. I knew what they were thinking. I knew them intuitively. And I knew so much more than just my own consciousness. And the minute I woke up, the nurse said, "Do you know who you are?" And I said, yeah, I remember her name because I didn't fully identify with being me because I was still just kind of out there in that consciousness. And she said, no, you need to say your name. And there was this sobering quality to realizing now I have to be this individual. I have to be Tricia Barker, Tricia with all of her wounds, that are held in her body, her emotional limitations, her limitations, in life, now her physical limitations after this accident. And I thought, "Oh, all right, let's do this." And so I was back in my body. I said, hey, bring the surgeon in. I have to ask her how long I was dead. And they were looking at me, like I got startled looks from people. When I did ask my surgeon how long I had died, I could read her differently. Before the accident, I just asked her what kind of car she drove. She was a young surgeon. She was like 35. And to me, as a young woman, that was interesting. She was head of neurosurgery. And I wanted to know like how much money she made. And she drove a BMW. And after my accident, I was like, did you know that angels work through you and that I was dead? How long was I dead? And she looked at me like, nope, we're not doing this. And she gave me this look of, you better stop talking about this. And she said, we thought we lost you for a couple of minutes. And however, now you're getting blood transfusions. And very pointedly, she said, your brain should feel better after you get these blood transfusions, and you should feel more clear-headed. And it was this pointed, don't keep talking about this. I don't want to medicate you. And I was like, oh, darn. So she's not aware that angels were working through her, and she doesn't want to talk about this, but at least she verified I had died for a couple of moments. And I'm so glad that this has changed now. Some doctors are open to this. I remembered the song that was on the radio when I lifted up. I could have verified so much more about where they were standing, what they were doing. There's a lot of verifiable details I could have encountered in that room if she had been open, but there was not an openness. Well, I had a long journey. I was in ICU for 3 days and then 7 more days in the hospital. Throughout that whole stay, I was talking about God and, my family being my family. Um, they were very judgmental. And that was, oh, I forgot to tell you, one of the moments of deep learning in my near-death experience was I saw from the perspective of others not to judge. And I saw how I was judgmental and how judging others cut us off from the love and light of others. And I saw these two people I worked with who they prayed for me. They thought I was depressed, and I just thought they were older, full-time wait staff, and what do I have in common with them? And I kind of brushed them off as not important. Well, I saw how caring and good they were as people, and my soul felt embarrassed. I mean, I was only 21, but still I felt deeply embarrassed that I had taken on this cliquishness, this judgment, and I made this point. I was like, I will always look into the souls and hearts of people and will not judge them based on their outward appearances from that moment forward. And superficial, stupid things, who cares? And that was my note to myself. Well, my family was very judgmental. I remember hearing them whispering. I had a tiny little tattoo that they had never seen. And I remember my aunts going, oh, she's such a terrible girl. I can't believe she'd have a tattoo. And just bickering in the corner about little things, and they thought I was sleeping. And then when I would talk about God, my mom was like, who is she to talk about God? And I was like, oh, that's a little judgy. And so I pulled my mom aside and I was like, look, Mom, you're wrong and I'm wrong. We're both loved so much. You can't imagine how much you're loved. And she said, did you see Jesus? Like when I told her about the near-death experience. And I was like, no, but I believe that energy of Jesus is there in that light, but it's a little different. We're all met with love and we're all met with great forgiveness. And she kind of bristled at that. And, you know, that became her line from that point forward. And I know it's hard for people to understand how a mother can be so cruel, but that's part of my story. That's part of my experience. And she tried at times, like there were times she tried, but ultimately she's very controlled by her minister, her husband. She doesn't think for herself. And, there wasn't any ability for my mom to hear me. And that's very sad in many ways. After I left the hospital, I was at her house and I'm grateful to the good food that she gave me. She was vegetarian at that time. And so, I healed, but I delved into spirituality. She picked up books for me at the library that I asked for, and I was reading Deepak Chopra and Raymond Moody and Danny and Brinkley's story and just really going down, this spiritual path. I was reading about shamans and, you know, I was also having lots of out of body experiences and lots of lucid dreaming. Back then I didn't have a TV in my room. I didn't have a phone. This is 94, so I had books and I was writing in my journal. I was practicing meditation while in this body cast and spent a lot of time integrating this. Not every near-death experiencer gets that opportunity. Some of them have a heart attack and then they're back at work the next week and they're in a marriage, but I was 21. I got to take a year off from college, which was great. Read all the books I'd never read, think about my life deeply. And then I thought about that mission. I was like, okay, God, why did you want me to teach? And I realized along the way that school had saved me from my neglectful dad and an abusive mom, that school was the thing that gave me light and purpose. And I was like, well, you're probably going to do that for people. You're going to help them find their light and purpose despite challenging conditions, that you really are going to be there for people and that it will help heal you in the process. And I realized, like, oh, a life well lived is a life of service. And I knew at that point that my life was no longer about me, it was about other people. And that was kind of a relief because I didn't want to come back here for me. I wanted to come back and have a reason for coming back. And I was given a reason. I joke that God was my guidance counselor. Like I was pre-law, no education. And I haven't regretted education at all. It has been the great joy of my life. And I think at times I have felt supported by the angels. I have seen amazing transformations in students from all ages. I've taught eighth grade to community college, and I've never felt bored. I've always felt joyful in the classroom. And that's such a gift to love your job. I mean, I know that now in my 50s, to have spent all this time doing something I absolutely love and receive so much joy from, that really, God did this more for me than for other people. That, I wouldn't have picked a life of service. I would have been selfish and I would have reaped the benefits of, or the, not so beneficial experiences of being self-centered, really. That it's not joyful to be self-centered. It's miserable. Like we've all had those experiences where we think about our pain, our lives, our beliefs, are so much more joyful to be helping other people who we can share our gifts, we can help support them, we can help them live better lives. And when you help one person, you help their family, you help everyone connected to them. And I've seen this, I've seen single moms come through my classrooms and have the benefit of taking their sons to Europe, and showing them, the world because of the jobs and being on their mission and their path. I've seen men who've been in jail learn how to get a good job and assimilate into society because of community college and to take care of their families. And, I always look at this as it's not just that one student, it's generations of people that you touch, and that's how you spread light, is in helping others. And, you know, there's a lot to my story. As Catherine, is a medium, that was great openness. I was almost overwhelmed by my openness after this experience, but I would say I was a very reluctant medium. I would hear messages from students' grandparents, but it wasn't until my own father died and my father and I became close friends from that point forward. He was neglectful when I was younger, but he was a good friend later. When he died, I followed him into the afterlife because I was curious. I was like, okay, what's it like? Versus, the near-death experience versus the extended stay. And so I went to see a fake medium, at one of those events. And so I was sitting in front of the medium and he was going to channel my dad, and he was ridiculous. So the guy was like, "Oh, your dad is really honored to talk to me, and he thinks I'd be a good match for you." And I literally saw my dad like behind him going, "No, no, 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 that guy's crazy. You can talk to me." And so I was like, never mind. And from that point forward, I could just hear my dad, I could hear my grandparents, and then other people started asking me to see if I could connect with their loved ones. And I saw how healing it could be. I had to learn, along the way. There's boundaries and there's things you have to do, to clear yourself afterwards. You can't just keep talking to spirits on the other side. But it largely was a beautiful experience. I think it's a natural. Other cultures look at being connected to our loved ones on the other side as just natural. Other cultures look at intuition as just natural, and that's the way I look at it. You know, I I would say I'm spiritual, not necessarily religious, but I do love the Unity Church, and I do love certain churches that allow for conversation about spirituality and differences of opinion. But that's the story in a nutshell. I kind of rushed through it, but I love questions from people. That's always my favorite part of this.
Wow. I love your story. It's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Tricia, for sharing that. Um, yeah, some of the things, I mean, that just popped out at me, I just want to I start a couple things. Okay, so you had mentioned about the verifiable NDE and seeing your stepdad buy a candy bar, right, in the hallway. And then there were other things, right, that you said you could have brought up to the doctor, but she was kind of shutting you down and letting you know not to say anything else, or else you were going to be maybe in a totally different unit, right? So, what other things were verifiable about your NDE?
Yeah, so I've actually gone back to that night in 1994 and looked at the easy listening station because I was trying to find it was the Elvis song, Caught in a Trap, Suspicious Minds, that was playing when I lifted up. And so it was Elvis. And I just remember thinking, oh, I like this song, this is a good song. But it was a little more overwhelming to see the doctors. But I was seeing from like the top of their heads working on my body, and I could have told the surgeons what color, um, scrubs they had on, that they had, I guess, lights on their heads, like that was unusual. But I also saw pandemonium when the monitor stopped. So I saw, like, I guess it was the anesthesiologist who was up front, like when it crashed, when I crashed, my heart crashed, and they didn't expect that. That was like not what they were wanting. And I just saw everyone lift up their hands, to start dealing with it. And I remember thinking, how are they going to revive me? That was a weird part, but I didn't stay to watch that because there were other things to go see.
Great. Very cool. Very, very nice. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. And yeah,
And
with the research part, that's important, right? Because that's how they are able to establish whether it is verifiable or not. Correct?
yeah, and sadly, a lot of documentary makers want to talk to my mom and stepdad, at the very least, just have them verify that detail. But, part of my story is they went to their church and their church gave them pamphlets about how NDEs are from the devil.
Okay.
And, and so my mom did verify with me, and my dad did too, my real dad. He was
Mm.
like, my mom and dad said they were on their knees praying when my stepdad came back with a candy bar and said, made a joke and split the Snickers bar with them. So she was like, "Oh, yeah, he did have a Snickers bar." And and I think she understood I had an out of body experience, but in her mind, it was of the devil,
Right.
that it was all demonic, not because I didn't see Jesus and it wasn't 100% biblical. And so now she is around abuse and other things. She's like, I don't remember any of that.
Right. Typical. Oh. Well, that's good you were able to get that verification from her initially, right?
And my real dad said that he was very scared that I had died, and that's why he was literally on his knees. And my dad is a ex-Vietnam vet. He's not someone who gets on his knees and prays, but I was his only daughter, and I think there's a biological connection and spiritual connection to parents and their kids, and it's no parent wants to lose a kid. That's a deep, deep wound. And so to me, what was more important is that I felt their prayers. I felt my mom and dad's prayers. And so that was verifiable to me, like, and I asked him, did you say this in your prayer? And he said, yeah, that's basically what I was saying.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. All right. I saw we did have a hand up. So if anybody would like to, all right, Maria, come on in.
Hi, Tricia. I was fascinated with what you had to say. And one thing I was puzzled, well, I'm curious about, if you recall, did you feel fear at any time?
Not a bit. And that was the part that kind of shocked me too, because I had fear before I had the experience. The thought of dying was horrible, but I was actually kind of joyful the minute I lifted up out of my body because I was certain that we go on. And I was certain that whatever I was taking with me, my soul, my consciousness, was actually more of the truth than in the body. Like I kind of felt, as Evan Alexander says, that the brain is actually a limiter of consciousness, that I felt smarter, more in touch with more information, that I was learning really quickly, that everything was happening at a very quick rate. And so to me, as this lifelong learner, I was like, oh, it's better. It's actually better outside of body. Like there wasn't anything I missed about the body. I felt like time was just a little piece of time, that we feel like our lives are very long, but the minute I was outside of it, I was like, oh, it's just a tiny little speck in this whole big cosmos. And then I felt supported by the angels, supported by this light, supported by my grandfather and supported by God. So I never felt alone. Even when I was floating in space, I felt like there was something greater than me that loved me. And I know people have had distressing NDEs, but I always say, just call out for God, call out for the light, even in that afterlife, it's always there for us. So not a moment of fear, not a single moment.
So you now have a totally different perspective on death. You
Oh
don't fear
yeah.
it.
Don't I hate pain,
Yeah.
like physical pain. I'm in it right now. My neck hurts, but I don't fear death. And I've actually been tested, if you want to hear a story about that. So I was on a plane. So this was like 2004. So the near death experience happened in 94. We were in crash position. So there was a terrible storm on the way from Dallas to Seattle. They had us like this, like down. We were falling from the sky at a very, very fast rate. And I mean, it was scary. The guy next to me was screaming and crying, I have little kids. I can't die. Oh my God. And the woman next to me was just bawling. And I had both of their hands as I was down like this. And I said, it's okay. We'll leave our bodies before we even hit the ground, and we just go to the light. Just focus on God, focus on the light. We'll be welcomed by all of the people on the other side who love us, and your loved ones and your family are going to be just fine. They're going to feel you. Just breathe and think of God. Breathe and think of God. And then the plane's engine caught, at the last minute, and we made this horrible descent. I mean, it was really scary, into Spokane instead of Seattle. The pilot got off and he threw down his hat and he said, I'll never fly again. And he walked off. And I just started laughing because I thought it was funny. And the guy next to me said, who the F are you? And he said, are you like a minister? What is going on? Like, why are you not afraid of death? And the woman next to me was like, can we go have a drink? Can we talk about this? And I was like, no, I got to catch another flight. And so I
Oh,
just jumped on another plane.
I would have taken a bus, but but
So
you feel
really,
fear, but at that moment, the actual, so you're not afraid of leaving this world. You think it's better
no,
in the other one. Okay.
I do. There are people I will miss, but I feel like, a lot of my friends are mediums now. So, if I go before you, Catherine, you can just give people some messages.
How do you, my last question, how would you spot a fake medium?
You know, if it's about them and their ego, that was, that guy was trying to hit on me or whatever, and it was about how great he is, and my dad was like, nah, it's always messages of love from the other side. And, I think one of the harder things is when you've had a difficult parent, but they are in that love over there. It takes a minute to adjust to that. But I think there, as a medium, there are times when I have a ton of verifiable details and it's obviously a better reading than others. And it does depend on the energy of the person. There are people who have come to me very skeptical, but with an openness. And those are usually pretty good readings. But when someone is skeptical and just closed and just wants to project a lot of pain onto me, I usually stop the reading and I say, you know, you'd benefit more from therapy, and processing some things because I don't want to deal with that. You know, it's hard to get verification. So sometimes it's the person who is sitting, it's really funny. Like this brother and sister, um, I'm kind of off topic, but fake mediums ask a lot of leading questions. You know, like there's someone with this, you know, and they just keep getting a lot of information out of you. Like I like for the person to be quiet and I say, hey, here's my energetic impression of someone, and here's what they're saying. Do you know who this is? You know,
Right.
like I don't like for someone to tell me I lost my son. His name is Alex. I need you to, you know, like it's better because someone else might come first. The mother or father, you know, on the other side might come first and say, hey, and now I have your son with me too. And we've been together and we've been doing this. And I think the people who, and honestly, I don't, not to talk bad of people, Catherine, but you know, even some mediums Sean's had on his program, I noticed has a lot of leading questions. And I personally, I don't think
Yeah.
that's good.
Can I just give a little also
Yeah.
in my background too, because I also, you know, I'm a medium and I actually sat in circle for 8 or 9 years and developed my mediumship over the years and gave messages to the congregation at the spiritualist church. But you know, the first thing that we're taught is not to ask questions, right? So if a medium is constantly asking questions, then you have to wonder about that. And also evidential mediumship, right? You want to be able to bring through the part of like the personality of the person that's coming through. You want to be able to describe who's coming through, what they look like what they did in life, like different aspects of the person before, you know, you can say you really have a link, right, with that spirit.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's something you have to develop because, you know, what I've found is like I'll see a picture of someone, but I don't want to say, "Oh, your ex-husband was kind of fat." You know, like I mean, I don't want to say that, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
so you have
yeah,
to
you have
get
to be
better at
gentle.
describing like, you know, one person he looked Hispanic to me, but he was actually Native American. And so I was like darker hair, kind of a wider face, a big guy, you know, like so I didn't, you know, someone who's really picky could say she's not very good, you know, because I'm seeing an image, but you know, like you have to get better at just saying, you know, who someone is. And then our energetic perceptions of someone, you know, I might think someone's funny, whereas someone else might think, oh, that I had a really sarcastic, mean father, but I have a sarcastic sense of humor, you know, like so, you know, I might like sarcasm, you know, so
Yeah.
it's a mix of things, but the more open you are to just letting the medium talk, I think the better. And I know this for certain. I've been really lucky. I don't know if you've had these experiences, Catherine, but I had one guy just, he was retired, he had plenty of money, and he just said, go. I'm an atheist. He said, you tell me everything you can verifiably about my people on the other side. And that was the best reading I've ever had. Because one, I wasn't worried that, you know, oh, she's saved up for this reading and I better, you know, be on. I was like, he doesn't care. You know, he'd be just as happy as if, you know, one way or another. I got blueprints of his childhood home. I got pictures, you know, like when he gave me time to really like go, you know, then we got pretty deep into some verifiable stuff and it was fun.
Yeah. And well, one more thing I want to add. There are people out there that they set up shop, right, in the local towns or corner, you know, and they have, you know, like palm reader or whatever, you know, psychic. Those people are the ones you really have to be careful of the most, I think, because what they do is they'll do like a reading and then they'll start charging money. They'll say, "Oh, you have a spell, you know, I can get rid of that for you." I mean, all kinds of stuff, and people fall for it. It's really
Oh,
sad. It's
Oh,
really,
yeah. I mean, and sometimes they're connected to like an underground mafia too. Like they'll go out and search out people with money and really use them.
yeah,
And I always say, yes, we can remove pain from your past, but it's really just more like a prayer between you and me and God, and you can do this on your own. You don't need me. Like I'm just kind of modeling one way to remove some pain from your past. And so I think a true healer, a true medium empowers you to have that connection to your loved ones or to your own healing. They don't make you dependent and, hey, now you're gonna have to give me $700 if you want that that other thing removed.
yeah. And you always want to feel better too. If you feel worse after a reading, you know that that's not legitimate. That person is tapped into something nefarious or negative. So that's
Yeah, and I trust my intuition at this point. There are all kind of frauds out there in churches and in the spiritual community.
Mm,
And John of God is a huge example of that as a healer who was found to be a human trafficker. Um, Someone told me to do his protocol, and when I paid for it, I talked to the spirits he uses and I said, "Are you true healers? Can you heal me?" And they said no. And then I was freaked out and I was like, "Nope, get out of here." Cleanse the space. So I
right.
think trust yourself most
Yeah.
of all, too, like Catherine is saying. If you feel anything's off, trust.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments, insights, gratitude, anything you'd like to say? Yes, Alice. Come on
If
in, Alice.
if you are there any ways that you could kind of relax your mind enough to be able to reach out to somebody who sometimes I have a little intuition, what I call intuition, but I can't do anything with it, so is there any way to just kind of
So
get it
connect
out
to
there?
someone that you love on the other side. Is that what you're hoping to do? Yeah. So a lot of times grief does disconnect us. It's the love and the joy and the beauty that we felt with someone. Or one way to do that is just invite them to come into a dream. I think that's easier for people, that when you have a contact dream, it's usually full of light and love. But in your day to day, anytime you feel them, so say you have a little bit of intuition, you're like, oh, I'm thinking about them for no reason, or oh, was that bird connected to them, or oh, here's a sign that reminds me of them. Stop at that moment and go, hey, mom, dad, like, are you trying to tell me something? How are you doing? What would you like to tell me right now? And just listen. And I think when we're quiet and we listen, we might hear more or see more or get an impression. So I'd say if you think of a loved one, just take a moment to meditate in those moments and see if you hear something. Um, and sometimes you have to open it up, take a moment. You might try it opens up differently for different people. If you don't necessarily hear anything, try writing, kind of automatic writing, and see if something comes through. But being around other mediums and near-death experiencers, I think opens it up in you, because a lot of times you have connected, it's just you didn't see it as a connection. You're like, oh, I felt them or I thought of them, and then you brushed it aside. But Catherine, do you want to add more?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the other thing I'm thinking of is in the morning when you're just between that wake and sleep. I get a lot of stuff in the mornings where I just stay in that really peaceful state, and then I'll ask questions or I'll connect in. Like my mom came to me. My mom died in June, and she came to me and I felt her right away, and then I just said, "Is this you?" And I said, I need to see something that I'll know it's you." And then she showed me a little picture that I made when I was a kid, and it hung in her kitchen for, my whole growing up years. And then I knew it was her, because she proved it to me through that picture. Yeah. So, but those are really, really magical times. And if we try too hard during that time, it'll go away. So just kind of be in that energy of allowing, and just like in a nice peaceful state. Because once we try, it's like it kind of it disappears. But if we just allow and relax and enjoy and not have expectations of, the way we think it should go, we'll be really happily surprised by what spirit brings through. So you're welcome. All right. Does anybody else have a question or comment? Let's see who else is here. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much, Tricia. This has been wonderful. I just want to say it was so nice to have you here today. I just want to think if there's anything else I want to ask you before you go, because I was taking notes and I put little stars. Okay, well, one of the things I want to bring up is how, because this is something that really this really gets me, is the knowing not to talk too much about it. That moment when you get that feeling, right? Like, uh-oh, I better stop, right? So this happened to you in 20, did you say 2004 or
1994.
94? Okay, so we're going back like 30, yeah, 30 something years. Do you feel like things have changed a lot in regards to that? Yeah, because of the near death research that's gone on over the years? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I live here in Houston now, and there was a near-death experiencer. I forgot her name. It might be Alice something. She was a doctor, and she was actually in the same National Geographic study that I was in. And she went to hospitals and talked to other doctors and other nurses at Memorial and said, hey, whether you believe it or not, it's important to that patient. If they have a near-death experience, will you just document what they say and help them document it and verify anything that they say? And so she went around the country, and that's just one person,
Wow.
trying to talk to medical professionals. I think we see it all the time. I mean, like, sometimes I can't keep up with all the places my story's been. Like, they'll just put it, in different newspapers and magazines because people like reading about near-death experiences. So I think it's definitely in the consciousness of people, even if the medical professionals are closed, they're still going to know it. But I think a lot more people are open now, certainly. I mean, my students, for the most part, know what they are.
Yeah.
Most people know what a near-death experience is now.
Most people have heard about it, and at least, the very least, heard about it, right? And are curious. Some are more curious than others, but that's great. That's great to know. And let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to ask you. Oh, I really liked how God laughed when you said, "No, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm not going back to," or something like that. You were like, "I'm not going back to that place," and that you wanted to be a lawyer, right? And then you heard God laugh. So can you like talk about that? Like, how did that feel? Was there some kind of shift that happened after that? Because then you were back to the
Yes.
body. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of near-death experiencers think that our accomplishments, our money, what we've done, how we've proven ourselves matters to God. It doesn't. How we have treated other people and how kind we have been and how loving we have been, that's what matters to God. And it's not, did you build a monument to me? Did you teach other people to love? And so this idea that I had to have money in order to heal my childhood wounds, like, because I wanted to prove to my family, hey, look at me. I'm smarter than you. I'm wealthier than you. I'm better than you, but that would have been competition. What God wanted for me was really healing and to inspire others and to help others, and knew that, hey, I could have been a lawyer, but I could have been an alcoholic lawyer who was mean and upset and depressed and, died from pills, that honestly, like that could have been, would that be successful? I could have taken the abuse that I've experienced and, trampled on people and been a tough, horrific successful lawyer. I could have used all that negativity to fuel it into my career and been, the most, vile of people to other people and made money doing it. Not that all law is like that. It's not like that, but that's the type of direction I was headed, in some ways. And it wouldn't have been fulfilling at the end of the day, even if I had a big penthouse, you know, a tiny little working class home with a backyard and vegetables and meditating out there and knowing that I've helped people and walking along the river. Way better, way better. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, have there been moments I wanted more money? Sure. But, on the whole, I'm happy.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And then one more thing I wanted to ask you about the angels or the light beings that appeared to you when you were um, in surgery. Can you talk about them and what did they look like? And what did it feel like to be in their presence?
I wonder if I could I got AI to create an image of
Mhm.
close to what they look like, but they were made of light, and I think we see light that we can't see with our eyes when we're outside of body. So they were yellow, pink, blue, just this gorgeous light, and their eyes were pure white light that was incredibly intelligent. They weren't masculine or feminine, they were a mix. So like a really beautiful man or kind of a strong woman, like with curly hair. They Most of all, they just hit me as intelligent, like they had an intelligence beyond this world, and that was what amazed me. And they were healers, so I think
Yeah.
they have different roles, but in this instance they were there to heal me and comfort my soul.
Did you feel like you knew them, but you didn't know them, kind of like you did you have what did they feel familiar to you, but you couldn't quite place?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they were my guardian angels, and I think I was almost humbled that such intelligent, beautiful beings were there for me. I felt like for me, like, wow.
Oh, it's your team, part of your team. Right? Yeah, beautiful. All right, I see Maria has her hand up.
Hi, it's me again. How did you know? I'm taking near-death experience class also at Stony Brook, and it's
Oh,
fascinating
cool.
because I was pretty skeptical until I'm um, studying it, and and I can't quote you all the different articles I've read, but one thing that what intrigued me was that the people that had this experience, if they got to a certain point in the experience where they could choose to come back or go forward, it really was not left to them. But I'm wondering what brought you to the point where you thought, I I don't want to stay here, I want to go back, or did you feel, or did something happen outside of you to pull you back?
Yeah, for me, I feel like I didn't have a choice. I wanted to stay, and I didn't want to return because I felt like time was really relative. And I thought, sure, people will miss me, whatever, but it's just like that. They'll be over here and who cares? Um, so I didn't want to come back because I felt so good in the presence of God. But God said, you have more to do. And it was almost like I had a soul contract with certain students that they would, possibly kill themselves if they didn't have me as a
You
teacher.
had a
And
purpose. That's what it
yeah,
was. You had a purpose, so God wanted you to fulfill that purpose. A lot of people don't have a purpose, so maybe they go on. Whatever the purpose was, you felt it and you came back. So I find that intriguing. And
yeah.
I'm not as skeptical as I used to be.
Oh,
I'm very hopeful. Thank
That's
you.
great.
It's not a dark tunnel like a Tolkien, a
no.
Lovecraft science fiction thing. It's actually warm. And the other thing that I read, that children have very different near death, but when they come back, they talk about beautiful colors and not fear. So
Right.
that's a great
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And, children become very intelligent after these experiences because they were so close to God. They kind of come back, and it's just like a little blip in time.
Right.
They come back and their brains are so expanded, from that moment. I like to think, at least hope that since I was 21, I still had a few years before my brain at 25, stopped. So I think it helped me become more open-minded, and I think that that's a beautiful part of these experiences is that we become more empathetic and less self-centered. So there's all kind of psychological changes that happen. Not that we're perfect people, we have our wounds, but there's certainly we're better people because of it.
And you know what else happens? I met a couple people at the conference that told me that they were not an experiencer, but because they were so interested in this topic and started to delve into it, it made them more open, and then they started to have their own experiences. So it can cause people to have an expansion of consciousness that maybe they would not normally have had that experience hadn't they been delving into these topics and being open and hearing these stories. So
I
that's
know. I love the idea of like as AI improves and filmmaking improves, that maybe people could just sit in a museum or a movie theater and recreate some of these experiences and kind of meditate on what this love feels like, or what this oneness feels like, or what some of these beautiful experiences are like, and maybe have some of their own experiences.
yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, thank you. Thank you, Maria. I see we have Alice has her hand up. Let me bring Alice in. And
Have you ever, Tricia, have you ever tried to contact that surgeon again to
Oh,
see
yeah.
if she was willing to speak to you about that experience?
So a lot of filmmakers and so I was very quiet about my experience. I only told it to students. I know that's kind of strange, but I taught in a lot of low income school districts. And, when 9/11 happened, I told it to my students because they were going into the military. But the first time I told it publicly on a show was because of an IANS researcher, Dr. Jan Holden, and they looked up the surgeon. She had died. So she very quickly had a head-on collision, probably from doing, these long surgeries that she did, and her nurse both died in a car accident of themselves, and Austin was left with a huge deficit. It took them a long time to find another neurosurgeon to replace her, and people were waiting 34 hours in the ER instead of 17 like I did. It was a mess for a while. So I have occasionally gotten a message from her in spirit, which is interesting. And you know, the main thing that she tells me, and it's very healing and beautiful, is that she kind of wants to affirm me in the ways that my mom didn't, to just say, hey, now I see, you didn't really get the support on that spiritual level, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you.
oh, that's so nice. That's so beautiful. Yeah.
But I did meet a nurse who worked for her, not in the operating room with me, but verified, a few things.
Wow. Wow. And we all have so much help over there. We don't realize it, but we have so much more help over, on the other side than a lot of times than here, right? And they love to help us. When we ask, they will do what they can, Um, that's
I
what
don't know if you want to see the image
oh yeah.
of the angels. It might take me a minute to find it, but
Okay.
but
I'm gonna make you a co-host so that do you- is did you want to share it on the screen or
yeah, let's see. Sometimes I have to go to like my YouTube channel and it'll show up. This is Dr. Jan Holden, but I'm looking for my, oh yes, see if I can find it. I'm just gonna have to go to the store and then maybe I can find it. But there was one image. I did these designs of angels. I'm just trying to find the right one. There it is. So if you can see, I called it Archangel Raphael, but that's the closest to
You're gonna have
what.
to share. You're gonna have to push share screen.
Oh, okay.
Get on.
Okay.
All
Let
right.
me go back and share screen. Are you seeing my screen?
No.
Oh, okay, there.
Now we are. Okay.
That's the closest I've found.
Oh, beautiful. Wow.
But it was a little more feminine. That just looks like a man, like in some ways. But the light, it's just hard to describe. They looked humanistic, but
Yeah.
made of light.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's beautiful.
It's hard to get things exact, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because there are no, there's nothing here on earth that can replicate that, right? It's just such a whole other dimension and the vibration and this what we're seeing and experiencing is it's so much more real than this reality. That's how I describe it. So
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's like this really is the Matrix. Like this is, or Plato's cave, that we're seeing shadows, that there's so much more going on.
Yeah, it really is. Well,
Well, thank you so much for this. I do have to run. I've got to drive
Okay.
across town to another campus.
All right. Well, drive safe. And thank you
Yes.
so much, Tricia.
Thank
This is
you. Thank you
treat
very
having
much.
you here.
You and
Thank you.
and to Dwayne, don't worry, just send light around the plane.
Yes.
Just
That's
Thank
right.
you. Thanks.
Call in your angels. Call in
yes.
and surround the plane with all of them in your mind. And
Sounds
Exactly.
And have a drink too.
I think I will.
all right,
Have a good
everybody.
week, everyone.
I'll
Thanks.
see you next week. Have a nice week. Many blessings.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.